Thank you for organizing it. And I think it came at a very right time where many countries need this kind of conversation in order to end the stigma. I'm really honored to be part of this most important discussion. My talk today is on gender-based violence, femicide, and COVID-19 combination in South Africa, a worst, woman's worst ordeal. This presentation is based on the work that LifeLine has done in deep rural areas of KwaZulu-Natal, which is a province within South Africa. And the project is funded by TDH, which is Trade Home Suite, and it's also implemented in partnership with them. I felt that before I even go deeper into what were the challenges around COVID-19 last year, I felt the need that maybe we just need to look at the context of what was happening in South Africa prior to the outbreak of COVID-19. South Africa is known to have the most progressive constitution in the world, and many African countries look up to it. However, South Africa is battling with its own challenges. You will see that South Africa has the most highest reported incidence of rape in the world, and women who have been raped in South Africa have actually like a lot of chances of their attackers or their rapists being HIV positive, which is 1 in 4. And that actually creates more pressure or more trauma to the victims of rape. And the danger from rape and sexual assault is compounded because of HIV prevalence in the country. Normally, survivors don't just have to deal with the issue that they've been raped, then they had to deal with the issue that they might also be infected with HIV. What was also very noticeable and said prior to the outbreak of COVID-19 is that most of the perpetrators are actually known to the survivors. About 70% of our victims are actually raped by the people that they know. That could be the uncles, the fathers, the grandfathers, the brothers, the cousins, but 70% of the cases are people that they know, that they have a relationship with, or the people that they trust. Another thorn in South Africans' flesh is actually the issue of intimate partner violence. That was very high prior to COVID-19. As you can see there on the statistics, that about 55% of the panic activation that goes through the security companies in South Africa, it's actually because of domestic violence. So they will press the panic button because they are being beaten up by their partners. And that is happening across all the race groups, across all the ages, across all the educational levels. So it's not that it's only happening in deep rural areas, because people that often have liberty to have this high security are people that are most affluent and people that are kind of like working that and a good salary that they can put these systems in place. So we also know for a fact that in South Africa, it's well known that 1 in every 4 women is a victim of domestic violence. And some statistics also indicate that a woman is being killed in South Africa in 6 hours. So it is within this background that we will then talk about what COVID-19 has created. All these statistics were there prior to COVID-19, which actually indicates that the country was in trouble before COVID-19, but COVID-19 unfortunately made the situation worse. So, of course, having this context in mind, we can imagine what happened to the woman then during COVID-19. So the outbreak and the lockdown of that, especially the restrictions at level 5 and 4, where all businesses, government departments, public places went into a standstill. Women were then, the entire situation exacerbated the problem that we have as a country. The abuse became more intense in the families that were experiencing abuse initially. For example, women reported that even in the families where the partner used to be aggressive but will only perpetuate emotional violence, as during the lockdown, deaths actually became more intense. It became physical, and some women lost their lives during the lockdown because they were killed by their partners. Also, women reported that the frequency of the abuse or of the incidents increased during the lockdown. For example, they'll be saying, my partner used to hit me maybe once in a quarter or once after every 6 months when he is really mad. But during the lockdown, because they were in the same homes, most of them were actually reporting being beaten up on a weekly basis. And some of them, once after every 3 days, they will be beaten up. But this situation did not only affect women. It is said that also children had to witness the abuse or the intimate partner violence that was happening, but also they also got affected by it because at times they come in between the parents trying to actually resolve the situation or trying to actually end the fight. So as the country went into the panic mode because of COVID-19 now, I think the country went into a panic mode, went into a shock. And at that particular time, especially around April, May last year, the main focus was on physical health and was to promote health and safety of all South Africans. But that was done at the expense of the mental health. And at that time, gender-based violence survivors were forgotten, especially around level 4 and 5. The whole country went into a panic and they were only thinking about the pandemic, which was COVID-19 at the time. Women and children were locked in the same homes as their perpetrators, which increased the rate of the incest, where uncles, brothers, and cousins now were abusing the younger children within the household. Out of all the cases that we saw last year that we supported, 60% of the children that were raped last year were raped by their family members during the COVID-19 restrictions. What was also very noticeable and was very sad for the survivors is the fact that Department of Health and SAPS, which is South African Police Services, and LifeLine were the few kind of like services that were opened to support the survivors. Public transport was not accessible. It was only accessible for essential workers during the morning and late in the evenings. The issue of the permits also played a major role, as some of the victims could not travel to town or go to town for services without the permits. And in order to get the permit, you needed to go to town anyways. So it just created drama. Children normally report cases of abuse in schools. Schools were closed for more than 5 months. So that reporting part was completely closed for the young ones. And of course, the loss of income and the anxiety that came with it, especially we noticed that there was a lot of aggression as the partners or the spouses had no income. And it also created more abuse even in the families that had never reported abuse before, but they were reporting it for the very first time because of the issues. What also made the situation worse, the protective, personal protective gear was not also easily available, which led to the Department of Health staff like nurses going on strike, which again left the survivors with no services when they went on strike. So you could see with all of this that the country was definitely not ready to manage both pandemics, which was actually a big blow. But what the lockdown created, it's also very sad. While the families were scared and they had to live in fear, hoping they don't get infected by COVID-19, perpetrators of gender-based violence saw an opportunity. They actually used that opportunity to perpetrate even further and to abuse more women during that time. And below, you can just see some of the examples of the cases that LifeLine had to deal with. We had an 87-year-old granny and 2 young women who were gang raped by people who actually pretended to be working for South African Defence Force, and they were wearing South African Defence Force uniform. It was late at night, and the elderly woman died during the act because she couldn't cope with the act. And the other case that we dealt with is a 17-year-old girl that was repeatedly raped by the uncle. And when she reported at home, the family did not believe her, so she took her life. And we also had a mother of that 17-year-old trying to kill herself because of what had happened. And of course, LifeLine had to do a lot of intervention with the mother to try and save her. We also dealt with a 34-year-old woman who was stabbed 13 times by a partner in front of their children. And children were left highly traumatized after that incident. In another different case, we had 5 children that were sexually abused by their father. 3 got infected with HIV, and they were all under the age of 12. And all of that was happening during the lockdown level 5 and 4. In another case, it was a 29-year-old woman who was beaten up by her partner, chopped her ear because it fails to do its function, meaning she doesn't listen, so she doesn't deserve to have that ear. And another case, it was an 11-year-old girl that was repeatedly raped during the lockdown by the uncle. And the uncle instructed a 5-year-old brother to take videos of the entire action. So it's not only the girl that was highly traumatized, but the brother was, because he was constantly there taking the videos. So these are just few incidents that I would like to mention here, but LifeLine dealt with many more survivors that were in a similar situation. And the question was, did they ever get support during level 5 and level 4 lockdown? Which now leads us to the next slide that actually looks at what were the challenges. Did these survivors get support that they needed at that particular time? You'll see in my box on the left is the statistics, because as much as I've mentioned only the few cases, but as a country, we had a lot of cases that were reported to us. But for this presentation, I just looked at the province where LifeLine is situated. We had 49,772 new gender-based violence cases that were reported. And note that it's the ones that were not reported. We still believe there were many more that happened that did not get to be reported to us. And this is 36% increase compared to 2019. And of course, 87% of the survivors, when they were screened for depression, they screened positive because they were highly depressed. And sadly, only 22% of them managed to get post-exposure prophylaxis, which is the treatment that stops HIV infection. And this is because they reported late due to the lockdown restrictions. They couldn't access services immediately. So it was just a nightmare. And on another research that was done by Department of Health, of course, South Africans reported that the depression rate has gone up from 24% to 29% between July and December 2020. But now, what the victims were going through, because of the lockdown, most of them ended up with unwanted pregnancies because they couldn't actually go terminate the pregnancy. Some of them were young as age 13 and they kept quiet. So by the time the family realized what had happened, they were already past the termination phase. So they had to carry the full term, even if they didn't know or they didn't want that baby. Most of them also were faced with the challenge of having sexually transmitted infections. The majority of them, as we know, South Africa is battling with HIV. They are only active, some women, but they defaulted on the treatment because of the restrictions. And some women also defaulted on their contraceptives, which is the treatment that they need the most. And as we know, when women have been abused, the trauma containment needs to happen within a couple of hours from the time they were exposed into trauma. But in some cases, most of those women did not get their trauma containment services due to most of the services being closed during level 5 lockdown. And of course, it progressed to post-traumatic stress disorder, where most of the women now that we're dealing with were suffering from anxiety, depression, and some even had suicidal thoughts. And sadly, there was little or at times no support at all for these women that are now suffering from mental issues. And before the COVID-19, South Africa as a country had a lot of challenges around mental health issues. And you will see that I've tried to actually categorize these challenges. It's not a new thing that we had these challenges. Of course, they became worse during COVID-19. But in one side, I have challenges that, in my opinion, they kind of like states or they are higher up at the government level. And those challenges, you'll see that in the mental health phase shift that was done in 2020 last year, it indicated that 1 in 3 South Africans who or do have a mental illness. Unfortunately, 1 out of 10 South Africans will access mental health treatment. And what is even more sad is that only 5% of the health budget gets used for mental health issues, which actually indicates that as a country, we are not taking mental health seriously. We're not allocating enough resources for this problem to be managed properly at the governmental level, which is actually a major concern. And I'd say that we don't think it's that important. At a community level, there is a lot of stigma, and the previous speakers had alluded into that. There's stigma going to the facilities, there's stigma taking the treatment, but also in KwaZulu-Natal, where we are situated, the research that was done last year as well indicated that 41% of pregnant women were depressed in KZN. That's a very high number. And in many communities, mental health issues are just ignored. But what is worse, they don't even think it's an issue that needs medical intervention. Most of the people that are suffering mental illnesses, they tend to go consult with traditional healers and they do rituals. At times they get told by the traditional healers that you are actually being nominated or you need to be trained to become a sangoma. Or at times they get told that you're becoming a Satanist, but nobody gets referred to the mental health institutions where they'll be supported. Of course, social isolation and restrictions that happened posed a higher risk for emotional fallout, and communities don't so much support as they don't believe women needs to be supported. When all of this happened, LifeLine team decided they can't sit and actually do nothing. So that's when actually last year you could see the team, they went on the streets, actually educating about these things, saying no to gender-based violence and trying to bring it to the light, because all these cases were happening behind the closed doors and somebody needs to bring it to the light of the people. And of course, a lot of services LifeLine got involved in during the lockdown level 4 and 5, because we worked as one of the essential workers. So our team of counselors, social workers, they were forever dealing with these cases on a daily basis, which again also affected them emotionally because some of these cases were highly, highly traumatic. You'll see the services there that the organization tried to provide, and we had to help a lot of women try and get protection orders so that they are not being abused, or in order to try and get the abuse to stop. Unfortunately, at times the courts will be closed as well. So it will be like a long battle with LifeLine trying to get the woman out of the situation. And of course, they were moved into a safer places where they can hide until the protection orders are done or until the perpetrator is actually arrested. But all these services at the end, they were trying to help and contain women and help them to remain mentally stable while some of them are being referred for medical supports or antidepressants that some of them they needed. But as an organization, we had a lot of lessons that we learned during that process. So of course, the main thing is as a country, we're not at the moment being proactive in addressing the mental health issues. So as a country, we really need to come up with programs, and that will change the society and the way people think when it comes to mental issues, and programs that actually will address stigma. But one of the main things that we felt the country needed was to really look at increasing the budget allocated to mental health issues so that we'll have enough resources at a community level to actually manage such issues. Because with the restrictions and the lockdowns, at times it's very hard to expect women to travel like 3 hours to go to town and 3 hours back home just to see somebody, a health practitioner that will help them. If these resources are at a community level, it will make a huge difference. But also we felt, since most of the South Africans, especially the Black South Africans, still believes a lot in traditional medicines, a lot in traditional healers, we feel that maybe the South African government is missing something there that could be actually used to try and break the stigma, but also to help the people that are suffering from mental issues to get support. If traditional leaders can be trained on mental issues and the symptoms, and be trained on how to actually talk to people so that they can access the correct medication. South Africa did this well during HIV and AIDS when it was highly stigmatized. People used to consult with traditional healers instead of going to the clinics or facilities. But then the Department of Health decided to work with traditional healers, train them on HIV signs and symptoms. And now they're very good at referring them when they see those signs. So we're seeing a gap that if something similar to that is done, then traditional healers, because they're very popular, but we, instead of actually judging them and get angry that they're getting involved in mental health issues that they don't understand, maybe we need to help them understand it better and use them as a channel to refer people that are suffering from mental health issues. Instead of making them do the rituals, refer them for a proper medication. We also feel that education of the families needs to be done in an open and honest manner so that people don't feel that stigma. If all families could be educated about mental health issues, there will be less stigma. Also, if education starts in lower levels, like in primary schools, if young people get educated about it, as they grow up, they'll have a better understanding and there'll be no so much stigma attached to it. Also, if we could create platforms so that people can have open and honest discussions about these sensitive issues, like this platform that we're having today, but it mustn't be the only one. There must be more platforms where communities can actually join in and have this kind of discussions. Also, in deep rural areas, of course, we don't have a lot of services that support women, hence people don't cope better. So if at the community level, we can have community members that are trained to also understand the signs, the symptoms, and refer people, but also to find the right language that can be used to refer to the mental illnesses instead of using the one that stigmatizes people. In this Zulu word, there's actually one word that generally people use to refer to somebody with mental issues. They say, uyahlanya, meaning you've gone cuckoo. So the moment you are seen going to that clinic, and that is labeled is for mental issues, people know one word, uyahlanya, you are cuckoo, so nobody wants to go near that. So if we could get like clever people that can come up with better languages or words that can be used, it will actually make a huge difference. Most of the times we tend to leave men behind. And for me, if we are serious about changing the situation as far as mental health is concerned, we cannot leave men behind. We can't leave our fathers, our grandfathers, our brothers, and our colleagues. I know the program is mainly focusing on women, but women live with men who also suffer these mental illnesses. And at times, it perpetuates gender-based violence. So we can't leave them behind. And we really need to find ways and programs that will bring men on board so that they are part of the program. Men don't like visiting doctors, we know that. And of course, it's because of the social norms, the socialization, that they need to be strong. They can't show any signs of weaknesses. They need to be a man, and a man doesn't cry. But it affects women and children at the end because the anger gets taken out on them. And of course, if you can work with boys at an early age so that they will seek mental health services and they embrace the mental health, they see it as part of going to the clinic if you have diarrhea, then it will be actually much better. And of course, having those educational programs that deals with emotional wellness, and especially for men and targeting only men, that will go a long way. And we believe that mental health, it's a foundation of stable families, communities, and societies. It should be given the priority it deserves by everybody from the government to service providers, communities, as well as individuals. This issue will never be addressed by one person and the person succeed. So it needs everybody to be part of it. And of course, lastly, if mental health is promoted, at LifeLine, we believe that if it's promoted and embraced by everybody, we will have less gender-based violence and femicide issues in our societies. And of course, citizens will be emotionally and mentally well if we all embrace it and we see the signs early and people get supported and services are rendered untimeously, these issues will actually be nipped before it becomes a crisis. Thank you.